Bailey, a devoted dog, would sit at the edge of a peaceful park every night and bark non-stop at an ancient oak tree. No matter the time of day or the weather, he remained focused. Yet when interested locals chose to find out what Bailey was attempting to disclose, they discovered a stunning fact that permanently altered the town. It was a cool autumn day. The sun had set, and it was twilight in the little village of Greenville, with the earthy smell of fallen leaves filling the air. A majestic oak tree stood in the middle of the park, bathed in the gentle glow of the moonlight. Just hours ago, gnarled branches extending upward, creating eerie shadows on the ground beneath a golden retriever named Bailey. He sat there with gentle, expressive eyes, making this place his nightly vigil. Bailey wasn't just any dog, as seen by his determined barking while gazing up at the ancient oak tree. He was renowned for his kind disposition and his devotion to his owner, Anna, a reserved woman who had relocated to the community. Locals initially believed Bailey's behavior to be innocuous, attributing it to a bird or squirrel years ago, perched in the tree. But as the days stretched into weeks, Bailey's visits increased and his barking became louder. Bailey would frequently appear, sit at the base of the oak tree, and bark rain or shine. Children muttered about the mystery, as if they were attempting to convey a story that no one could hear. Older people remembered stories about the park's past, including ghost stories and hidden treasures. Many stories left unsaid and secrets buried. The oak, which was once a symbol of beauty and tranquility, now appeared to be covered in calm tension. Anna, who was quite concerned about Bailey's obsession, did everything she could to get him to stop, including giving him toys, food, and even walks. One evening, she said, "What's going on, boy?" Nothing worked in his favorite spots. Bailey, who was kneeling next to him, glanced at her for a moment, his bright eyes full with urgency. It wasn't until several neighbors made the decision to act independently that he returned to his watch. With flashlights in hand and their hearts racing, they assembled at the foot of the hill as the mystery started to come to light. The tree was keen to find out what had Bailey's full attention. Mark was among the neighbors who had gathered at the park's edge, their breath evident in the clear night air. Beside the town's handyman, who had spent his entire life in Greenville, was Grace, a retired educator with a talent for answering problems, and her adolescent grandson Leo, who had demanded to participate after. Anna, who was gripping Bailey's leash and listening to rumors of a secret, glanced at the group with a mixture of thankfulness and, she said, her voice trembling a little, "I'm worried. I don't know what's gotten into him. He's been acting in this way every." Mark nodded and shone his torch at the towering oak, as if he knew something we didn't. It had been night for weeks. Tree dogs are intelligent, so if Bailey is obsessed with this tree, there must be a reason. Bailey yanked at the leash, his barking getting louder the closer they got, and the group exchanged nervous looks. Hannah reluctantly led him when he reached the tree, and he ran to the base, smelling the ground and sloshing at the. Looking at him with desperate resolve, Grace said, her eyes wide, "It's..." Leo is crouching next to Bailey as if he's trying to unearth something, clutching a camera to record the night's happenings. "Do you?" he questioned, his voice shaking with excitement. "I think something's buried here." Mark moved ahead with his torch. He spoke something that might be illuminating the tree's enormous trunk, but it's odd. If there's anything hidden, this tree has been here longer than any of us. Bailey's barking got to the point where the group paused, uncertain of what to do next, while he clawed at a particular location close to the tree roots. Eventually, Mark knelt down to the dog and took a tiny trowel out of his pocket. We can infer what he muttered grimly as Mark started digging while the others huddled around their torches, casting changing shadows that moved across the twisted. The first layer of soil, the roots, readily fell away, exposing a patch of discolored. Bailey was standing on the earth beneath Mark, his tail swinging wildly, and his barking was replaced by a low whine. "What is it, Anna?" Mark stopped and brushed away the dirt with her voice, which was hardly audible above a whisper. He said that his hands felt like wood, and he gradually removed more dirt to expose. Grace gasped at the corner of what looked like a tiny wooden box. The group gathered closer as Mark carefully removed the box from the ground, asking why someone would hide anything beneath a tree. Despite being old and having a broken and corroded surface, Bailey, Leo asked his camera as he anxiously circled, his nose twitching as though he could sense what was inside. Mark, who was trained on the box, paused, his hands hovering over the cover just once. "Way to find out," he replied, his voice brimming with excitement as he lowered the lid, open to see that it contained brittle, fading photos and a little notebook bound in leather. Anna grabbed the notebook, her hand shaking, and opened it. "It's a journal," she replied quietly, the pages full of spidery handwriting and muddy ink. Whoever authored this was in something that Grace leaned in as they skimmed the text. "What does that say?" Anna read aloud, her voice faltering as she adjusted her glasses. "I had to hide it somewhere. No one would find it beneath the bed because I couldn't bear the guilt any longer. Old Oak, where would be secure, although I apologize if you're reading this." Mark cleared his throat, releasing the tense noises as the group became silent under the weight of the words. He murmured something akin to a confession, but Leo pointed to the pictures in his. His curiosity was overwhelming him. "What about those? Perhaps they could provide us with further information." Grace grabbed a picture and held it up to her torch. It depicted a crowd of people standing in. She whispered, "This must have been taken decades ago," as their faces became blurry with time in front of the oak tree. Mark peered at the picture, his face deepening. "Do you recognize anyone?" Replied slowly, "But something about this bothers me." Bailey then startled everyone by barking sharply. Quickly approaching the tree once more, his nose pressed against the bark, his body tense. Focus, Anna scowling and holding the diary firmly. But she added that whatever they were concealing wasn't limited to this box. The group exchanged uneasily. Looks if Bailey was still acting. Grace, the pragmatic, came up. She stated forcefully that we must determine what else is happening, since we can't stop now. Mark nodded his torch, skimming across the enormous trunk of the tree, concurring that there might be more to this tale. "We'll find it." And with Bailey in the forefront, the team got ready to discover the next puzzle piece. Mark continued excavating close to the ancient branches of the oak, oblivious to the startling discoveries that lay underneath them. After Bailey persisted in pouring the soil, the tree's base became easier to move even though it had become compacted over time. As the company waited, the torch rays bounced across the uneven ground as though it had been disturbed earlier. Bailey's ears perked up as his tail waggled wildly in the tense hush. His nose. Mark never left his workplace, but all of a sudden, Mark's trail struck something hard. Everyone froze as the dull clunk reverberated through the silent night. "What is it?" Mark wiped the perspiration from his brow and gently brushed away more dirt as Grace asked in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. He answered softly, "It feels like metal," and worked quickly yet carefully, exposing a corroded lock fastened to what appeared to be a metal panel buried deep within a secret room. Mark nodded, his expression showing the joy in Leo's voice. Although it appears grim, Anna knelt next to Mark, asking why something like this should be buried behind a tree in the middle of the park, holding on to Bailey's collar to prevent him from diving into the just discovered hole. Whatever it was, she added, "It's important enough to hide," her eyes wide with interest and terror. With a mechanical screech, a little door broke way when Mark pried used a crowbar from his tool belt at the lock. A dark hollow chamber about the size of a suitcase opened up underneath it, and Grace shone her torch inside. What looked to be a sealed tin canister covered in layers of old, fragile cloth was illuminated by the beam through the aperture. Mark carefully reached in, rubbing his fingertips against the chilly surface of the container as he removed it and placed it on. Leo asked his camera to focus on the ground so that everyone could see what was within. There was only one way for the canister Mark to know that he had taken off the cloth, exposing the canister's lid, which opened with a hiss of stale air after being twisted firmly. As they fled inside, they discovered a number of things, including a stack of yellow documents, a little. Anna picked up a folded letter in a velvet purse with shaking hands. The penmanship was precise but hasty, with smudged ink as she unfolded it. "Location," she read aloud. "So I implore anyone who finds this to proceed with caution. The truth about the day that everything changed is concealed here, if they know it has been." The gang exchanged anxious looks and signed JW. Disturbed, protected at all costs. Grace furrowed her head and said, "Who's JW?" Anna shrugged and traced I don't know their initials, but whomever they were terrified, so Leo grabbed for. When the velvet pouch is opened, a small key and a collection of antique coins are visible. The coins sparkled in the torch beam, their elaborate patterns indicating that they were made years ago. They appear to be priceless. Why bury them with this other stuff? Leo whispered, raising one up for a closer look. Mark scooped up the pile. He immediately flipped through the documents, which were fragile and faded, but he could see bits of scribbled notes. Additionally, Mark stated that this isn't just random rubbish, even though it looked like an outdated map. Bailey barked abruptly, drawing the group's attention as if someone were trying to conceal something significant. Returning to the tree, he stood tensely, gazing up at a particular branch. In his low growl, what Grace was asking now. Her voice trembling, Mark pointed his. Bailey was focused on the beam of the torch, pointing towards the branch, when he noticed something glinting in the light metallic object. High up in the tree, Anna asked, protecting her eyes from the flare. Leo squinted as he changed his camera's zoom. It appears to be a box. Mark gave Grace his torch and started climbing the tree, causing his hands to scrape the hard bark, but he made quick progress. Curiosity led him to the branch, where he could plainly see a tiny metal box. Using corroded nails, he carefully peeled it loose without losing his hold, and descended again, gathering the group around him as he placed the box on the floor. It was barely larger than a shoebox, Grace remarked, her voice heavy with filth and rust, and covered in another box. Unbelieving that one tree could contain so many secrets, Mark opened it to unveil it. Include a stack of pictures and an additional folded sheet of paper. The picture showed a crowd of people standing in, similar to those they had discovered previously, but these were more distinct, and the faces were more recognizable. Anna gasped and gestured towards one of the figures, indicating that it was Mayor Collins. Remarked, and that's Mr. Turner, the town historian. These individuals are all related, so Grace picked up the folded. She was shaking as she held the paper, which was another map with marks that appeared to match the park, designed with the words "Final Resting Place" written next to a red X. Leo repeated his words, trembling, as he scrolled next to its final resting spot. Does that imply that? Bailey growled once again as he pounded the ground close to the tree's base, his growls getting deeper. Mark's demeanor remained gloomy, suggesting that the group was poised for what was about to happen themselves as they got ready to delve more, not realizing that what they were going to discover would completely alter their belief. They were familiar with their sleepy small hamlet, but the group's anxiety was evident as they were ready to continue excavating close to the tree's base. Normally gregarious and vivacious, Bailey now displayed an odd, with solemnity, his paws clapping the ground as though he were resolved to divulge the torch, the tree's secret. Are you sure about this? Grace asked her as lights danced across the soil, highlighting each root and shadow mark. Mark halted, looking up at her with a resolute expression, his voice shaking. What if we're tampering with something we shouldn't? With Grace, Bailey is attempting to convey to us that whatever is buried here was intended to be discovered. We must discover what it is. Anna knelt next to Bailey, petting his fur to soothe him. Good boy. You're doing great. Show us what you found, she whispered, her voice barely heard above the rustle of leaves. Leo stood, returning, modifying his camera's focus in case this proves to be an old crime scene or a cursed treasure. We're undoubtedly going viral, he muttered, half joking. Leo, it's not all about the... Anna lost patience with Mark, and he ignored the conversation. He took a bigger shovel and started excavating where Bailey had been pouring the soil, focusing solely on the task at hand. Loose, almost as though it had recently been disturbed, which made everyone in the group even more anxious as the minutes passed. As the hole deepened, Mark's shovel unexpectedly struck a solid wooden object, surface considerably bigger than the metal sections they had previously found. He paused and gestured for the others to assemble around a box. Mark stated in a voice full of excitement, a big one. Leo laughed as Grace stepped back, her instinct telling her to get out. What if it's a coffin? She muttered. Grace was not alone in feeling anxious, but please stop allowing your imagination control you. The group felt apprehensive as the temperature seemed to drop and the soft sound of the leaves rustling became an almost threatening murmur. Even Bailey, who had just been so resolute, now stood. Mark swiftly cleared the area while his ears were frozen flat against his head. It was an ancient, aged crate held together with iron hinges, with dirt still present till the whole wooden surface was visible. With a corroded padlock, the gang looked at each other anxiously as Mark held up a crowbar and asked who wanted to perform the honors. Anna moved forward, her hands shaking, and she said firmly, "I'll do it." The wood moaned in protest with a final sigh as she pushed the crowbar under the lid, ignoring the dread in her eyes. Several little Hessian sacks, each tied with twine, were found within the crate when the lid was pushed open. And Mark reached in to pick up one of the sacks that had an old journal laying on top of it. It was heavy, and after he untied it, Leo continued, his voice hardly audible. Gold coins spilled out into the dirt, their surfaces gleaming even in the dim light. "Whisper, is Anna really this real?" She picked up the journal, her fingers shaking, and turned over the pages. The notes had specific transaction dates, and the handwriting was crisp but faded. Anna remarked, her voice trembling, "Names, this isn't just treasure. These are bribes. Money made to quiet individuals who see the names of these well-known persons in." Business owners and town politicians. Grace's face went white as she bent over Anna's. She remarked that whoever kept this was involved in something significant, and she looked over her shoulder to read the entries. Picked up another burlap sack, which had a bundle of photos tied together with a bit of string and further cash. Photographs showed folks they recognized, some of whom were standing together in the previous images. "This can't be real," Leo mumbled during what seemed to be secret meetings. "It's genuine," Mark replied solemnly, holding up his camera as he lowered it for the first time. One of the pictures, which clarifies why someone would go to such efforts to conceal it. Bailey's starling bark. Everyone looked at the tree's trunk as he stood at the edge of the hole. Grace asked in a terrified tone, "What is it now?" Mark flashed his torch on the tree, where they noticed it partially hidden by carvings in the bark. Initials JW, the identical initials from the letter Anna murmured, were written by Moss. Mark's thoughts was racing as he ran his fingers over the sculpture, wondering who JW they knew. Regarding this, they most likely buried it here to protect it from what Grace asked, and before anybody could respond, there was a rustle in the woods next to the group, breaking the quiet. "Did you hear what Leo whispered?" Their eyes darted towards the sound, and they froze. Bailey's body was rigid as he faced the direction of the commotion, and he snarled while holding his camera hard. Mark intervened. "Who's there?" he yelled out, and the rustling got louder as he held the crowbar in front of the GR group like a weapon. Closer till the group gasped as a shadowy figure appeared out of the shadows. There was obvious fear, as if you had discovered something that wasn't yours. The person spoke in a low, threatening voice. The group naturally crouched as the hooded figure approached, his boots crunching against the fallen leaves. The torch rays flickered as Bailey stood guard in front of them, snarling low and steady. Unsteady hands attempted to focus on the intruder's face, asking, "Who are you?" Mark's voice was forceful but tinged with. The man entered the dark light with dread, his wrinkled face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Before focusing on the open container at their feet, "That isn't yours," his penetrating eyes swept across the bunch. Mark tightened his hold on the crowbar and said, "Who does it?" in a chilly tone. "Belonged to this and have been buried for decades." The man grinned. "It doesn't matter if it's unreadable. What matters is that you ignore it." Anna, who was still holding the journal, came forward. "This is proof of corruption, not simply a treasure. Thought you were uncovering some grand conspiracy trust, but you didn't want others to see the man's narrowed eyes. You don't want to delve any further into this, so why didn't Leo share his curiosity?" The man looked at some antique pictures and some gold coins, and it overcame his dread. "What's so hazardous about them?" Bailey, who hadn't stopped snarling, is aware of the danger, even if you're not. Animals can detect mumbled words. As the wind seemed to get colder, Grace trembled and clutched her arms, seeing things that people cannot see. "Do you imply that the man squatted and ran his fingers over a question?" His face tightened as he ran his fingers over the initials etched into the tree, and for a little minute, it appeared as though he was lost in, pondered, but then he suddenly got up and gestured towards the crate covering it again. Leave as if you hadn't noticed this. Mark shook his head. The man's jaw tensed, and his voice became cold. Buried here is linked to something greater that we cannot ignore. You're mistaken. Some secrets are kept hidden for a purpose, and unearthing them would only cause problems. Anna's hands are shaking. She gripped the journal more tightly. Who are you protecting? These individuals harmed others, didn't they? They exploited their position of authority to conceal their crimes. The man's face briefly softened, perhaps conflicted, but you don't get it. There are individuals who will stop at nothing to keep this buried. Bailey. So if you continue, you'll endanger yourself. His body was tight, as if sensing, and his ears were pinned back when he barked forcefully, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Grace muttered, "There's an immediate danger. Something's wrong." Her eyes darted across the trees. "We shouldn't be here," the man stepped back, his hand lingering close to his side, as though he were looking for something hidden under his coat. "This is your." Mark kept his position and said, "Leave now, or you'll regret it. Departing until we comprehend what's happening." Before the man could react, a loud crack sounded like a. Everyone paused, their eyes searching the darkness as the branch snapped under pressure. Bailey barked once again, louder this time, and his attention was drawn to a group of shrubs close by. "What was that, Grace?" The man's manner changed from his prior confidence when she muttered her voice, which was shaking. Giving into anxiety, "You've already drawn notice," he whispered. "They're coming." And Leo asked, "Who are they?" The man turned instead of responding as the camera continued to catch the pandemonium that was developing. Left the party alone with the open crate and an increasing feeling of dread as he vanished into the shadows on his heel. "We must depart immediately," Grace murmured, pulling at Mark's arm, but Mark wasn't prepared to give up their discovery no matter what. "He's correct, so we must determine what's happening before someone else discovers us." Anna looked through the. "There's an address here," she remarked, her voice rising as she looked through her journal once more, searching the faded pages for clues. Standing at a former storage facility, Leo appeared dubious. "It feels like a horror film waiting to happen if you believe that we should follow a random address in the middle of the night." Mark, our lone lead, stated unequivocally that whatever is in that storage facility could be the cause of everything. Bailey snarled once more, bringing them back to the here and now. His attention was now on the man's. Anna said, looking at her watch, "Let's go, we don't have much time." The gang grabbed their luggage, leaving the crate uncovered, before whoever they are unwillingly showed up. Bailey led the way with his nose to the ground in their hurry, acting as though he already knew where they were going. As they wound their way through the forest, the temperature dropped, and there was a strange silence. Every twig breaking and leaf rustling made their hearts sing as they settled over the area. When they eventually got out of the jungle, the race and the feeling of being watched were nearly intolerable. The journal's location directed them to an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. With its drooping roof and broken windows, "This home appears to have been abandoned for years," Grace said in her voice. Mark pushed open the rusted door, its hinges squeaking in, just above a whisper. "Go inside." Where decay, Bailey sniffed the ground, and the air was heavy with dust. With his tail twitching a little as though he had smelt something familiar, Mark continued, "Let's see what we can find as the." Bailey halted abruptly, his ears perked up, and he barked as the group started searching. Boy Mark hurried to follow Bailey as he rushed into a closed door at the rear of the building. "What is it?" he asked, barked loudly at the door, and Anna held up the journal, revealing. Mark checked the door and saw a keypad lock. "We need a code." He must have read something about a secure place. Anna reopened the journal and saw a string of numbers scrolling in the margin. "Try this," she murmured. As she read them out loud, Mark entered the code, and with a gentle beep, he unfastened the latch and pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lighted room with ancient photos, filing cabinets, and a. "This is it," Anna said, her voice laced with amazement. Metal safe in the corner. A huge crash reverberated throughout the structure before they could start exploring, and they heard rushed footsteps. Grace's voice wavered as she spoke, and the sound of rushing feet became more audible. The group's anxious looks were echoed menacingly through the building's vacant COR doors. Bailey's growls and the reality of their position caused his adrenaline to spike, making him tight in his stance. Mark tightened his hands, his thoughts racing, and he positioned himself between the group and the source of the disturbance. "We must." Pointing to the entrance, he whispered frantically, "Barricade the door. Whatever is approaching, we can't allow it to in here, Leo." Grace, still holding the book, frantically pushed a rusted filing cabinet against the door while she scanned the. Bailey barked hard, his eyes focused on the dim hallway, and he said, "Beyond whoever they are there." Anna trembled as she muttered, "That man in the jungle wasn't lying. We've stepped into." Mark should not have been crouching next to Bailey and petting his fur in an effort to soothe the dog. He firmly stated, "We need to figure out what's in that safe, Anna. We didn't come this far to back down." Nodded, turning to the journal's back, and said, "There's a combination here." She traced her finger across faded. "Numbers may work." Mark and Leo went to the safe, their hands trembling, collaborated to enter the combination. The lock clicked, and the safe door opened with a clack. Inside, they discovered. Anna carefully examined piles of old papers, old photos, and what seemed like an ancient key wrapped in a piece of cloth. Grace whispered, "This must unlock something important," as she peeled the cloth to show the delicate design of the key. Took a picture out of the safe that showed a bunch of men standing in front of a big oak tree. The outline of a building loomed in the backdrop, half veiled. As they stood there, Grace stated in a trembling voice, "These men are. This is deeper than we had believed in relation to the tree." And before anyone could react to the sound of metal scrapping, Leo yelled, moving away, as someone tried to force the door open as the air was filled with metal. Mark tightened his hold on the crowbar from the barricade, saying, "We can't let them get to us, so stay behind me, group." Their fear was evident as they crowded together, and Bailey's piercing barks reverberated around the space like a warning bell. The door trembled wildly, and suddenly it exploded with a loud bang, reveal a swarm of dark individuals with masks covering their faces. Leader, a tall, powerful man, walked forward, his voice icy. Mark kept his ground and threatened, "You've seen too much." He continued, "Give the documents and go, or you'll regret it." The man laughed darkly. "The truth is the truth," and the crowbar elevated. "We're not going anywhere until we know the truth. Won't help if you're not here to tell it," Anna said as she moved forward, her hands shaking, but her voice calm. The man's smile vanished, and a steely expression took its place. "Why are you so terrified that these secrets may be exposed?" Bailey surged forward as he added, "You're playing a dangerous game." "Glare," he said, "some things are meant to stay buried." "Call off your mutt," he growled, and the man trembled, obviously disturbed by the dog's ferocity. Mark shook his head. The tension in the room was oppressive, and Bailey was simply responding to the threat you brought here. Grace's eyes were wide as she gripped Anna's arm, each second seeming to drag on forever. Fearfully, "What should we do?" she murmured. Anna looked at the paper she was holding, then at the key. There was more to. Mark nodded, his mouth clenched, and she added, "We need to leave and see what this key unlocks. We'll divert." Bailey is taken by Anna Grace to run and discover what this key is for. "How about you?" With terror in her voice, Grace implored, "Weck, keep them off." Mark sternly replied, "Now leave before." Mark surprised the closest intruder by swinging the crowbar at him, and Leo followed him with a. With her heart racing, Anna hesitated for a second before snatching Bailey's collar and using the shattered chair leg as an improvised weapon. While dragging Grace to the rear exit, she insisted that we must relocate the. Bailey led the way as the three of them ran down a little hallway, his nose to the floor. Behind them, they heard the sounds of. They broke through a side door as the scuffling and screaming became louder and mixed with Bailey's sporadic barks of distress. Anna gripped the key hard as her thoughts raced into the chilly night air, their breath evident in the little moonlight. Bailey took a moment to sniff the air as she attempted to put the puzzle together, then pulled them towards the edge of. Grace asked in a quivering voice, "I don't know. About the land where he was taking us." As they went, Anna looked back at her heart. "But we have to believe him." Pain for Mark and Leo. She convinced herself that they would be all right. Identifying herself as Grace, Bailey guided them to a remote location close to the tree line where an ancient, as like he had discovered the next stage in their journey, The overgrown trail started to wag his tail a little. Anna inhaled deeply. She held out the key and stated, "This isn't over." Her features hardened as she said, "We're going to finish what we began when Bailey and Anna Grace followed the dim trail into the woodland." The route was overgrown and narrow, and the air appeared to get thicker as though the trees were holding their breath. Bailey walked boldly, sniffing out the way with his nose low as he saw the gnarled roots twisting across the ground. Bananas. Grace asked her, "What do you think this key opens?" As her mind raced with questions, Anna shook her head, saying, "I don't know, but must be important. It was hidden for a reason." Her voice was almost audible above a whisper. Bailey abruptly stopped, his tail tight and his ears perked forward. He emitted a low growl, his eyes focused on something in front of Anna and Grace, who stopped breathing, catching in their throats. Anna crouched next to him, whispered quietly, "What is it, boy?" As he crept forward, Bailey's growl grew louder, and they heard the slight rustle of leaves. And Anna, she muttered to Grace, "Keep the key close," and tightened her hold on it as they rounded a corner. A odd sight appeared at a curve in the trail. An ancient, corroded metal door set into the base of a huge tree. Bailey barked after wagging his tail, but the door was entirely obscured by the moss and vines. Grace gazed in wonder at a door in a tree, as though to say, "This is it." Anna looked at the door, her fingers following the thin trace of a series of carved symbols, wondering if it was even conceivable. The key felt cold in her hand, and had a design that was uncannily similar to a circle of concentric circles encircling a single-pointed star. "This must be it," Anna remarked, lifting up the key to reveal whatever was beneath it. "They have been attempting to conceal this entrance." Grace hesitated. "Do you really think we should open it?" We've come too far to turn back now. So it's risky," Anna said firmly. Her heart was racing as she inserted the key into the lock, which turned with a loud click. And a wet, musty stench rose as the door cracked open to expose a small staircase leading into darkness. Anna looked at Grace, whose face was pale, and her stomach churned. "Resolute, are you ready?" Grace asked, nodding. Bailey led the way down the stairs with his claws clicking on the stone while holding Anna's arm. The air grew colder as Anna's phone's light barely broke through the darkness, creating long, eerie shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the steps, they reached a room where the soft sound of trickling water reverberated about them with every step. A tiny room with shelves along, it was illuminated by an ancient, flickering light bulb suspended from the ceiling. With fading books, dusty jars, and odd artifacts in the middle of the space was an enormous, elaborately carved chest, and Anna approached it warily, her fingers shaking. Grace held back as she reached for the latch, her gaze darting tensely around the room as Bailey sat next to his gaze remained on Anna's chest as though to encourage her to go on. And when she opened it, the breath she had been holding inside was piles of old papers, photos, and sealed envelopes. But the thing that caught her eye the most was a tiny wrapped. She picked up the journal that was laying on top and carefully turned through its pages. Ink faded, but was still readable. The journal was written in a shaky hand and described the actions of a covert organization that had been active in the community for decades, utilizing their power to accumulate riches, and, as the entries developed, they became darker, suggesting sinister sacrifices and rites carried out to preserve. "Their manipulation is crazy," Anna muttered as she skimmed the papers. These individuals were dangerous in addition to being corrupt. Grace discovered a bundle of letters bound with twine and started reading aloud to guarantee that the tree's heritage endures. Undisturbed. "It is our secret and our haven." She glanced up at Anna, whose face was pale, and they concealed themselves behind the tree. Bailey barked once again, turning to a corner of the room and wailing as he poured at the floor. Using the light from her phone, Anna quickly rushed over to inspect the area and found a loose stone on the floor. Opened it to reveal a tiny metal box with a sealed envelope inside, emblazoned with the same sign of a concentric circle as the door, which Anna ripped open. Hands shaking, the letter was brief and foreboding, warning that the guardians would awaken if the sanctuary were violated. Grace retreated with wide eyes, demanding that the secret be kept safe at all costs. "Guardians what?" Does that imply that a deep rumble rocked the room and dust fell before Anna could react? Bailey snarled fiercely, his hackles up, as the light bulb flickered wildly from the ceiling. "We need." Panic rising in her voice, Grace exclaimed, "Get out of here," and Anna snatched up the journal letters and photos she was cramming. The rumbling became louder as they rushed up the stairs after letting them inside her luggage, and it appeared as though the walls were closing in on them. When they emerged into the woodland, the door behind them banged with a booming thud. The trees trembled furiously as though they were coming to life, and the ground shook beneath their feet. A terrifying roar reverberated through the night as Grace rushed between the trunks. "What's happening?" she yelled, gripping Anna's. "I don't know, but whatever it was," Anna's thoughts was racing as she gripped Bailey's leash hard. "The forest appeared to be alive, but it's bound to that tree and doesn't want us here." The earth shook beneath Anna and Grace's feet as their movements matched the panic pulsing through them. Shadows darted as Bailey snarled and stood his position in front of the now-sealed door set into the tree. Their shapes are unidentifiable, but unquestionably frightening between the woods. "We need to figure out what's going on with those documents. There must be something in them," Anna said, holding Grace's hand tightly. "What if we've unleashed something that we can't stop?" Grace hesitated, her voice trembling. Anna looked at Bailey. "Who?" "Bailey isn't scared. Therefore we shouldn't be either." He stood attentive, his body tight, his ears perked, as they traveled farther into the forest and away from the rumbling tree. Anna took the journal from her purse and leafed through its brittle pages, each one depicting a group so engrossed in their quest for. She noticed that they had gone black on ancient customs, and that the guardians were tied to the tree. If the sanctuary is in danger, their strength connected to its roots will awaken, and those who upset the equilibrium will have to. Anna's breath caught as Grace read over her shoulder their rage. "I believe the woodland is dreadful, but you don't think Anna stared at her, responding to our actions, but we didn't upset their equilibrium." Instead, Bailey's bark abruptly caught their attention. Returning to the route, his tail waggled wildly, but his stance stayed alert in front of the dim torchlight. Illuminating a clearing, the light showed a circle of people standing with hoods covering their faces. As the tableau developed, Anna and Grace huddled behind a fallen log and watched as the figures' voices sang in unison. A stone altar with the same concentric circle etched on its surface stood low and rhythmically in the middle of the circle. Grace whispered, "Is this the group from the star symbol as the tree's door?" Journal Anna nodded. "They must still be present and defending there." Bailey growled softly, but Anna put a soothing touch on his head. "Not yet, boy. We must first determine what they are doing." The chanting became more intense, and the clearing's atmosphere became more. One of the chilly figures advanced with a wooden box that resembled the one Anna had discovered in the hidden. When the figure opened the box, a variety of artifacts, including candles and bones, were revealed. Anna's stomach churned, and a tiny vial of dark liquid appeared. "They're doing some sort of right." Grace took hold of her arm and whispered forcefully, "We need to stop them. Need evidence first, because if we stop them now, they'll simply reorganize and try again. So we must reveal everything as they." Observed as one of the figures set the vial on the altar and started talking in a language that neither Grace nor Anna could understand. Noted that the forest appeared to react to the sound of the wind roaring. Bailey gave a short yelp as the shadows grew darker, his body shaking with stress. Grace said, "The hooded figures turned in unison, their faces hidden in shadow, knowing we're here." Anna stood trembling and pulled Bailey's leash as the three of them ran away. The cloaked figure was closely followed by the sound of footsteps and branches breaking through the undergrowth. Figures rushed with lanterns bobbing in the dark, moving swiftly. The diary had indicated that the group's power was connected to the tree, but it had not provided an explanation, so Anna's mind was racing. She gripped the evidence bag tightly, knowing that it was their only opportunity to reveal the truth about Bailey. Guided them to a tiny cave beneath a rocky crag, where they sheltered. The footfall outside became louder and suddenly stopped, and Anna put a finger to her lips when she heard desperate gasps of breath, indicating a pause. She listened carefully, her heart racing after a few anxious seconds. Grace sagged against the cave wall, her face pale, the footsteps fading into the distance. What are we going to do? They'll ultimately discover us. Anna took out the journal and turned to the final few pages that we must decipher. Bailey sniffed about the cave, his ears twitching, and poured at a mound, thinking that something must be their weakness. Of rocks revealing a little gap leading to a secret tunnel. Nice boy, Anna. She went to Grace and patted his head in a whisper, saying, "Come on, if we stay here, we're—" Anna held the journal while the ducks sat in the tight, wet tunnel, which smelled strongly of moss and earth, firmly using the light from her phone to direct the pages as they disclosed additional information about the group's past, including specifics. Anna's voice echoed as she spoke about their customs and the strength they derived from the tree they had been using for generations. They keep their power in the tree in the tunnel, but Grace's eyes widened if we were to harm it. Believe we can stop them. Anna nodded, her resolve building. We must. This can only be resolved by Bailey barking once again and shaking his tail as the tunnel led to a larger room in the... This is it, Anna. In the middle of the chamber was a huge root system, its twisted tendrils glimmering dimly in the darkness. As she spoke, her voice was full with wonder. The cavern's heart throbbed within. Anna, Grace, and Bailey stood frozen in a state of unsettling tension, the glow from the tree roots creating shifting patterns on the walls. Observing the bizarre scene as the roots coiled and twisted like living beings, their dim light casting odd. Their strength must come from the symbols carved into the stone floor. Anna. Grace shuddered, and the air felt alive as she spoke something that was just heard over the faint buzz. Bailey growled. The fur on his spine bristled as he looked down at the roots, and Anna placed her bag on his back and comforted him, saying, "Easy, boy. We're here to stop this." Down and took out the journal, turning to a page that detailed the customs of the group. One particular sentence caught my attention. The connection must be broken at its core. The roots will fight, but destroying them is the key to putting an end to the... Grace glanced over her shoulder to read the sentences, her eyes wide. Guardian's power disrupts the core. How do we even do that? That Anna looked around the room, her thoughts racing. If we can break their connection, we'll need to cut through the roots. Grace pondered whether we could stop them, but what if it made matters worse? Release something much more hazardous. We have no other option. Anna stated forcefully if. We must try, Bailey barking sharply drawing, because if we don't stop them, they will continue to use this power to rule the community. Their focus. Anna's heart fell when she heard footsteps coming from the tunnel behind them. Grace, they're coming. Looked around frantically. We must go quickly. Anna picked up a sharp rock off the grass and went up to the biggest. Road, its light growing brighter as she approached. She paused, then used all of her effort to drive the rock into the root, and the result was instantaneous. The root writhed furiously, generating a high-pitched screech that echoed across the room, the hum growing louder and the light flickering. Grace shielded her ears from the nearly intolerable vibration. As she worked, Bailey barked as Anna pulled the rock free and whacked once more, aiming to cut the root completely. The hooded figures emerged at the entrance, and he growled, placing himself between the women and the tunnel. Long shadows were thrown on the walls by lights as the commander moved closer, his voice resonating menacingly. You shouldn't have arrived, and Anna held her stance, firmly grasping the rock and refusing to let go. You don't keep this power. It ends here, the boss said icily. Recognize that the tree power you are dealing with is not ours alone. It belongs to the Guardians, and they will not permit. The roots started to pulse more violently, their glow growing brighter, as if on cue. Shadows gathered at the room's boundaries as the temperature dropped, and another unearthly cry reverberated through the chamber. Grace retreated as the shapes changed and swirled like smoke, her eyes wide with. The leader's voice was full of reverence as he questioned, Fear, where are those Guardians? Bailey's body was stiff and ready to defend them when you awakened them up. Anna looked at him. Unyielding resolve. We must complete this, she said. Grace, keeping them. Grace grudgingly nodded and moved forward to confront the hooded figures as I destroy the roots. She yelled back, her voice powerful but wavering, and the figures paused. When the leader held up a hand to signal them to move forward, Grace picked up a branch from the ground and violently swung it, causing them to maintain their distance, while Anna kept hacking at the roots, her arms hurting from the strain, causing the roots to writhe, and screamed with every blow, their light gradually fading as the room's shadows deepened. They resembled enormous creatures with bright eyes and sharp, claw-like claws as their forms came together to form unique shapes. One of the tentacles darted for Anna, but Bailey stopped it, springing fiercely, and his growls reverberated through the Bailey, Anna yelled, hitting the root with crimson vigor, the leader of the chamber as he battled to defend her excellent boy. His voice rose in anger as the hooded individuals approached. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Anna chose to ignore him and concentrate all of her efforts on cutting the root with one final blow. The root broke, and its light instantly went out throughout the chamber. The leader screamed in rage. You've doomed us all, as the shadows gave off an ear-piercing roar and shivered violently. The rest of the roots started flailing madly, their light flickering wildly on the room walls. Anna grasped Bailey's collar as it split, and rubble poured down from above, then turned to Grace and said, "We have to get out of here." Grace let go of her homemade weapon and rushed to join Anna, with whom she hurried in the direction of the tunnel Bailey. The sound of stones smashing and the cry of the shadows fading were heard behind them as the chamber fell. As they entered the woodland in the distance, the ground trembled one last time before becoming quiet. The air was. Anna and Grace fell to the ground, gasping, as the stifling force that had pervaded the woods vanished. Bailey stood next to them, gasping for air and waving his tail gently, as though to indicate that we. Did you notice how strangely still the woodland was? The stillness, standing in stark contrast to the chaos that had just transpired. Bailey and Anna Grace stayed on the ground, gasping for oxygen as the crisp night air closed around them. The trees' once bright glow had disappeared, and the woods were now illuminated by the dim light of. Do we truly stop it? The moon. Grace sat up, her voice shaking. Anna turned to face the cave entrance, which was now blocked by rubble. We had interfered with their power supply, but I don't believe they haven't left yet. Bailey's ears pricked up, and he growled softly. Anna followed his eyes and noticed that the hooded group had survived the fall and were emerging from the shadows. The leader's robes were frayed, and his face was covered with grime. You idiots, his eyes are burning with rage, and his voice is dripping with venom. Know what you've done? You've thrown off a balance that's been there for longer than time. Anna stood and pulled Grace to her feet. The commander laughed. You know exactly what we did. We stopped you from controlling this town with your lies and fear. You resentfully believe that this has ended because the Guardians don't require the tree to survive. As if called forth by his words, the surrounding forest will make you pay for what you have damaged since they are eternal. They came to life as shadows took on hideous shapes, and their eyes glowed. Bailey yelled angrily, but the Guardians had not vanished. They had been unleashed like embers in the night. His body shook as he positioned himself between the women and the approaching shadows, but his bravery remained unwavering. Anna's thoughts was racing, so she tightened her hands. If we stay here, we must keep moving. We are sitting ducks. And, as the leader held out his hand, the shadow rushed forward. You cannot flee from them because they will pursue you. Regardless of where you go, Anna grasped Grace's hand and fled into the forest, disregarding his taunts. Bailey, the Guardians trailed closely behind, their otherworldly cries resonating through the tree limbs. Anna's lungs hurt as they were whipped at their faces, and the uneven ground threatened to trip them at every stride. Moved ahead, determined to keep Grace and Bailey safe. We must figure out how to stop them, Grace yelled. Anna tried her brain, remembering one line from the journal, her voice barely heard over the roar of their pursuers. Most notably, the Guardians are obligated to their creators to relinquish authority. Anna yelled, We have to destroy the altar Grace's eyes in order to destroy the symbols of their summoning. Broadened in recognition, but it's back in the clearing where the ceremony was being conducted. This is our only opportunity, Anna shouted. We must fight our way back. They came to a halt and turned to face the Guardians, who were looming after them. Bailey snarled as they shifted closer, their bodies undulating and shifting. Anna, tense and prepared to defend, grabbed a big branch from the ground and used it like a club. Stay behind me, she said. Anna swung as the first guardian hurled its claws through the air at Grace. She used all of her strength to strike the dark figure of the beast, but to her amazement, it retreated. Anna yelled, "We can fight them," and Grace grasped a branch of her own as they flickered like a dying flame, indicating their vulnerability. Bailey rushed at another, his sharp fangs digging into the ethereal as he joined Anna in defending against the guardians. With renewed resolve, the guardian, Mass, let out another worldly screech and fled into the night. The hooded figures followed the group as they battled their way through the forest, each step bringing them closer to the clearing. As they attempted to call forth additional guardians, their chanting reverberated through the trees until at last the clearing was seen. The wooden box was still laying on the altar's surface, and the symbols were standing in the center. Softly pulsing with a rhythmic force that was engraved into the stone, Anna hurried to the altar without hesitation and used all of her might to seize the box and throw it to the ground, where it broke on impact and spilled its contents all over the markings started to vanish as the altar's glow faded on the forest floor. With their shapes dissolving into vapors of smoke, the guardians released themselves without a collective wail. Their leader fell to his knees while cloaked figures roared in protest, but you don't realize that without the guardians, the balance is ruined. Anna turned to him, her face displaying a steely glare. The leader lunged at her, his face twisted, and the only balance you worried about was your power over this town. Furious, Bailey stopped him before he could get to her, sending him to the ground. The man stumbled to his feet, but with the remnants of his eyes gone from the fight, he staggered back into the shadows and vanished into the jungle. Bailey hurried over to the clearing where Anna and Grace were standing, their bodies hurting and their breaths heavy. The woodland fell silent as Anna's tail waggled gently, seemingly signaling that we had succeeded. We halt them with grace, and the oppressive force is once again replaced by a sense of peace. Remarked in a relieved tone, "It's over." Anna knelt next to Bailey and scratched. Even though she knew their lives would never be the same, she agreed behind his ears that it was finished when the sun rose in the morning. The once dangerous shadows now emerged as the forest's warm, golden light streamed through the treetops. An atmosphere of calm and gentleness replaced the terrible weight that had draped over the trees. Suddenly, Bailey and Anna Grace came out of the clearing with a feeling of purpose at a slower pace. The night's events seemed like a faraway nightmare, but they could still clearly recall what they had experienced. Anna took one final look back as they got closer to the forest's edge. The clearing was hardly there anymore, yet she could still make out the fragments of the shattered box and a broken altar, which served as a clear reminder of the power that had. "Do you think they'll return?" Grace inquired in her voice, considering the bravery it took to stop it. Without the guardians there, Anna shook her head softly and with a hint of residual terror. "They may attempt to regain control of the town or the forest, but the altar has lost its power." When Bailey pushed Anna's hand and wagging his tail in agreement, she grinned. She exclaimed, "You were amazing, Bailey," as she crouched next to him and ran her fingers through his fur. "We couldn't have done it." Grace was crouching next to them, stroking behind Bailey's ears. "Without you. Truly is a hero," she remarked, adding that we wouldn't have known what was going on if he hadn't guided us to that tree. Bailey wagged his tail harder as though he fully comprehended their compliments, and the three of them proceeded to return town. The scene gradually changed from a dense woodland to open fields, and a village with its recognizable rooftops and meandering alleyways illuminated by the gentle morning light. And upon arriving at the town square, they were met with a mixture of word of their absence the previous evening had gone swiftly, and the people were filled with both relief and curiosity. Anna and Grace told their narrative of what transpired in the jungle and the unusual things that happened because they were curious about what had happened. As the group discussed their sinister ideas, the expressions of the audience changed from "I'm shocked," incredulous, and finally grateful that they were. One villager replied, shaking his head, "We're using the forest for something so dark." Anna felt a feeling of gratitude and continued, "You've saved us all." She had acted out of instinct and a need to protect, never anticipating being viewed as a savior. Yet humility had washed over her. She looked at Bailey and stated, "It wasn't just us. He was the one who led us there. The people looked at Bailey, who was sitting proudly at the center, and he realized something was amiss before anybody else did. When Anna's tail pounded against the floor, a cheer came from the. As preparations for the celebration started to take shape, a member of the audience proposed holding a party in Bailey's honor. Needing some peace and quiet after the chaos, Anna and Grace sneaked away from the commotion and sat on the stairs of. "I still can't believe it," Grace murmured, looking off into space as the town hall watched the peasants humming with excitement. Anna acknowledged that everything we saw seemed like something from a fiction, but it also makes me realize how little we know about the world around us, and how much more there is to life than what. Grace's slight smile, which we can see or explain, might not be such a negative thing if Bailey taught us anything. Because sometimes we simply need to follow the indications and believe our gut feelings. Anna glanced down at Bailey, hood coiled up. "He's not just a hero at her feet," she remarked. "He's family." The celebration that. Bailey was the center of attention during the exciting evening, which included music, stories, and laughter under the stars. Anna and Grace watched from the sidelines, their hearts overflowing as everyone in the hamlet gave them pats and treats. As the evening dragged on, Anna found herself reflecting on the town's unity and appreciation and happiness. Their trip to get here had been harrowing and uncertain, but it had also served as evidence of the. She turned to Grace and spoke about the depth of their relationship and their readiness to defend what was right. "Whatever happens next, I'm sure we'll deal with it together." Grace nodded, as if to cement their vow. She mimicked Bailey's resolute voice, and, in a silent moment, the three of them realized that they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger as a result. When the festivities came to an end, and the village was once again quiet, the burden of the night vanished as Grace and Bailey entered their house and found comfort. As Anna got ready for bed, she gazed out the window at the distant woodland in the comfort of their familiar surroundings. Now that the shadows were no longer a threat, everything appeared to be calm, and she felt a feeling of finality because they had done everything. With Grace sleeping in the next and Bailey cuddled up at her feet, they could defend their house and one another. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Anna closed her eyes in the room, genuinely tranquil, and the woodland was silent throughout the nighttime. We appreciate you joining us as we witness their bravery and the secrets that have been revealed. If you were moved by this unforgettable tale of bravery, loyalty, and discovery, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to become a member of our explorer and animal lover community. And together, let's continue to uncover the incredible relationships between people and animals, one story at a time. Click for more motivational tales. Come watch our next video. You won't believe the incredible bond in it. We hope to see you there.